Good evening, everyone. Mayank Mehta is our guest today. He's the Assistant Director for Entrepreneurial Education at iVenture Accelerator, which is the educational program for top student startups at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, of which he is a 2-time graduate. His undergrad was in economics, and he holds a master's in strategic brand communication, and he's also a spiritual practitioner. Mr. Mehta's professional background spans user experience design, brand strategy, social media strategy, and he is a content creator himself. His content revolves around empowerment through vulnerability, and that focus shines in his work here at iVenture Accelerator with me. At Geese College of Business, he manages several key innovation initiatives, such as social innovation-focused programming on special populations like women in entrepreneurship, our program fellowships, and overall operations, coordination, community building, and marketing for our vast iVenture entrepreneurial ecosystem. He is also the founder of Ginship, a generative AI-powered website that helps people in need of assistance navigate nonprofit and government resources in order to find organizations that fit their unique needs. He's an outstanding employee that has really changed my ideas in terms of empathy and leadership, and he is, believe it or not, making me a better director. Welcome, Mayank, to the show.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. Surprised you're still here. Surprised I haven't fired you.
Surprised I haven't fired you.
Oh, man. It's been such a blessing to have you here working with us at the iVenture Accelerator. And, speaking of work, not to make you work all the time here on the weekends, the first question we actually ask our students is the same question I'm going to ask you. So before they even build their companies, we run an entrepreneurship program. We focus on the entrepreneur, the individual. So the first question that I want to start off with you is, Mayank, why do you do what you do?
I do what I do to help other people feel loved.
I don't feel loved.
That's on you.
I'm just kidding. I feel very loved. So that's such an interesting concept, just the whole concept of love. What is love?
Okay, so there's all these different definitions of love, right? Like there's the Greek version of love, and they have like 6 different things, like eros, which is passionate love. They have agape, which is universal love. They have philia, which I think is playful love. But there's all these different kinds of love that you can either have with family, with your romantic partner, with friends. And there's also the spiritual version of love. And there's 4 different components to it. One of them is loving kindness. The other one is bringing joy into other people's lives. There is removing suffering from other people's lives. And then there's equanimity. I don't know how to say that word. But essentially it means non-discriminatory love. So loving kindness, bringing joy into other people's lives, removing suffering, and non-discriminatory love. So there's all these different definitions of it, but for me, love so far has been removing suffering from other people's lives. And so far, it's been in the form of interpersonal relationships where, all my friends, they come to me with their problems, and it's like, hey, I want to help them feel better. So we talk about it. So a lot of it's been emotionally related, but I've been trying to focus more on, actually doing more than just that. I can talk to my friends, but that's not, again, entrepreneurially, I don't know how to say that word either. I'm just going to be tripping over my words this entire time in this entire podcast. But yeah, I just want to help people at a larger scale than just interpersonal.
So this modern definition that you've kind of shared, is this influenced by both the East and the West? The whole concept of reducing suffering seems like almost a Buddhist concept. I'm just curious, where is this kind of modern definition of love kind of derived from?
I think just growing up, right, before I was self-conscious, when I turned 13, when I gained consciousness.
So 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Just kidding, no minors on this podcast.
There was just at some point, my entire life just became about love. I just want to help people feel better. People feel so bad about so many different things. And I was like, I want to help them. And this actually interesting story. I fell in love for the first time in 6th grade I loved this woman from 6th to 10th grade, and all I really cared about was like making sure that she was happy. Like it didn't really matter if I ended up with her or not. All I wanted was like, all right, she's happy, whether it's with me, whether it's not, like I'm okay being a friend, because like, hey, if I can make somebody happy, that's all that matters. And throughout that process, I kind of realized that that's all I ever really want to do with anyone that's in my life. That, hey, if you're feeling, can I swear on this podcast? Yeah?
I mean, I guess we'll have to bleep it out. My mom's going to listen to it.
Okay, I won't swear. Shit. Yeah, people just feel so bad. And it's like, okay, it doesn't matter if I'm romantic with them. I can still help somebody feel better, right? And then I realized I want to do that in every facet of my life. And I grew up Hindu. Eventually, I was Hindu. Then I was agnostic because like, oh, why is there so much suffering in the world if God exists? Eventually I came upon Buddhism, where the core thing is like literally the first teaching is that life is suffering, right? And it's like, oh my God, why would any belief system start off like that? But it's like low-key, it's kind of true, right? Like everybody suffers through life. So my current definition of love kind of derived from, okay, all I want to do is help people feel loved. And then the spiritual aspect of it also just kind of guided my definition or my way of defining it as I define it right now.
So you were raised Hindu.
Yes.
And are you fairly familiar with like Hindu scripture and?
Not with scripture.
Okay.
No.
So the concept of love, was that apparent at all in childhood when learning about Hinduism, or was that something more formulated when you started learning more about philosophy?
Definitely more as I learned about philosophy. I took a philosophy course in high school, and it wasn't something that I thought about actively. Like everything that I say right now is in retrospect. I put words to these feelings and to these experiences, but in the moment, it was just that I want this person to feel happy. I want this person to feel love. I want this person to suffer less. I want this person to not kill themselves. So I'll, do everything that I can to support them in any way that I can. Very, very inherently, it was about love, but I didn't really think that way until later on, maybe around my senior year of high school or college years, because it's like, I don't know, it's hard to be conscious of everything that you do in the moment. I don't think anybody's like fully conscious. I don't think anybody's ever fully present. Almost everyone is fully not present in what they do. And that's something that like I think we'll get into later about just the way that we treat ourselves and we treat other people. But anyways, getting back to the main point right now, I didn't think about it in these terms until far, far later in my life, even though my actions already kind of aligned with it to some extent.
So when you look at this, your personal definition of this and how it relates to your work today, essentially reducing suffering, how do you see that carrying off into your work? And do you see that as being a tremendous asset, or are there drawbacks to having that being the focus of your work?
I think in the way that I bring it into work, again, I don't consciously do it. It just kind of happens. I've been more conscious of it just because of my own spiritual growth recently, but it just kind of happens, right? And you know how in all these TV shows, they're always like, love was your greatest weakness. And then the hero's like, no, it's my greatest strength. I'm still trying to kind of figure out what it is for me, because I am overtly very, very, very quote unquote soft on people. Like if somebody messes up, it's like, hey, I've been there, if an iVenture student or any students, like they don't follow up on what they say, it's like, okay, I've been there as a student. I've been scattered as a student. I've made all the mistakes that they're making. And it's like, how can I be tough on someone who has done the same things that I've done? I think a lot of people lack the compassion. It's like, why didn't that person do it this way? Why didn't this person do it that way? They're so stupid. They're so, careless, blah, 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 blah. And not just students, just other people in general. But it's like, we all make mistakes. And it's like, where's the balance between being a guiding mentor on that versus being soft? Like, hey, I understand that life is tough, So I don't know if it's an asset or a strength, but just the fact that I can relate to people as opposed to being a judgmental person, I feel like that's probably a pretty big asset as an educator.
Yeah. It's one of the main reasons we hired you. If it's not apparent already, Mayank is the good cop. And I'm not even a bad cop. I think I'm just a vigilante. So
terrorizing the university.
and the students, Mayank is much more approachable and understanding and empathetic. And I was just asking this question from a point of leadership, right? There's various theories on like what's effective for leadership. Obviously, the one that comes to mind in this context is Machiavelli's, famous. It's better to be feared than it is to be loved, and above all, it's better to be respected, right? So I'm just curious, like, have you thought about, that is definitely an outlier, and it comes from a specific time, right? In the Renaissance, there's a bunch of city-states fighting each other where maybe that did work. But I'm just curious with you because, we kind of see things slightly different. I'm probably more of a believer in consequences and strict deadlines and accountability and ownership. But it seems like you're not necessarily lax on it, but much more understanding and willing to be patient to see the whole situation. I'm just curious how you see that interplay of both leadership styles, one guided purely by love and one also in some ways, I think, also guided by love, but just with a different style of expectation. Because we both want to end suffering, right? We both care about people.
Right. I think it's so interesting that you bring that up because something that we talked about before is leadership in times of peace and leadership in times of crisis, that sometimes people need a more powerful authority to guide them in the right direction. Sometimes people need it to be softer, right? And of course, that interplay, I think, works perfectly with us because we are very just clearly predisposed to one kind. Like I could never be a football coach, right? I could never give kids like that tough kind of love, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, get down and give me 50. Like, you better show up tomorrow at 6 a.m. or you're off the team. Like, I would not be that person. But it seems like, at least what we see in popular media, like kids or troubled kids, like they need that kind of immense authoritative love, right? I am not the person to give that. I know that I'm not the right person to give that. But there are obviously moments like now going back from like troubled students in football teams in popular media, going off of that to like iVenture stuff, there's definitely a space for me where, people in entrepreneurship, they struggle all the time. Like it's not an easy space to be. And sometimes they just need someone to listen. Like we talk about how it's so hard being a solo founder. It's like, yeah, sometimes they don't need to hear like, figure out these unit economics or your startup's dead. They want to hear like, you know what? I just want to talk about how difficult it is. But then at other times, it's like, yeah, you want your startup to succeed. Like, all right, let's have a strategy chat. Let's figure out the 10 different things that you need to do to make sure that you're successful so you're happy. And there's a time for that kind of love and there's a time for my kind of love. So to answer your question, like, how does that work? I think it works pretty well. And of course, like, this has just been our first summer together where I've been in as deep as you're normally into it. So I wonder how it'll be over the coming months and years. Like, will I become more like you? Will you become more like me? Are we both going to kind of find a new balance in the way that we work? Probably.
Yeah, I do think the complementary aspect of our skills and perspectives really works really well. I mean, tough times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men.
What are you trying to say?
Men create tough times.
What are you trying to say?
I'm just trying to quote some stuff there.
I'm going to weaken iVenture as well.
Just to be clear, this is not affiliated with the University of Illinois at all.
It's a fictional piece of work.
So, thinking about this, like that's such a it's a powerful message. It's a message shared by a lot of thinkers that have gone to like self-actualization. And we look at the Maslow hierarchy, like the people at the very top who have fulfilled all their needs, and they're really just actualizing themselves, like Henry Thoreau, Gandhi, Buddha, Jesus, like all these people. Like it is actually, we've talked about this before, a message of love. And it seems like that's a common theme unifying a lot of the human race. I'm very curious for you to share how you view us collectively and our place in the universe. If this is a central core concept for all of humanity, how do you see all of us unified? Like, how do you see our place in the universe? Like, I'm just curious on your perspective on that.
So one foundation that I think is just really, really easy to start off with is one that in spirituality, everyone who's been actualized, no matter what religious background that they come from, every single person has said that experientially, the universe is just love. And that's like so broad. But to kind of like take it away from that super abstract concept, they also say that literally everything is consciousness. Like the table that my hands are on, that table has consciousness going through it. We have consciousness going through us, through the listener, through you, through me, through the juice that we drink, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, okay, that's still really, really abstract, but like, what does that really mean, right? And one of these videos that I was watching talked about how when the Big Bang happened, everything was just energy, right? Even before atoms were made, there was just this energy. Then atoms manifested out of that energy. Stars manifested from those atoms. Stars, galaxies, rocks, nebulous gas, black holes, and all of that came to, this laptop that we're recording on, the fridge that just started humming behind me, through the trees, through the grass, through the sky. All of that still came out of that same energy at the very beginning. We're all just different manifestations of that primordial energy. And what they say is that consciousness flowing through everything is not some abstract spiritual whatever. Consciousness literally goes through everything. We as humans with our brains are capable of actually understanding that in a way that a tree couldn't. But to your question about our place in the universe, we are just a manifestation of this universal energy. Again, like as a physics thing, not as a spiritual thing. We're as much part of the universe as the grass is, as this galaxy is. And so many people think that like, oh my God, I feel so alone in this universe. I feel like such a foreigner. Like I don't belong here. It's like, what do you mean you don't belong here? Like you were created out of this universe. Like you were born from your parents were born from their parents, and all of it, if you take it back, was just born from those atoms and that energy at the beginning. We are not foreign. This consciousness isn't an accident in any way. It's just a direct consequence of everything that's happened before. We belong here because we are here. It's kind of circular, but it makes sense to me at least.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I think what comes to mind is the Carl Sagan quote, like something like, we're all essentially star dust. So just to make sure I'm hearing you right, we, you, I, this table, the people listening, like essentially are one and the same, but we are different manifestations of it.
Right.
Just like water can have different states, liquid, ice, gas.
Exactly.
Interesting. And the concept of consciousness, can you explain the difference, according to you, between how we perceive things? Is it just perception as opposed to how a tree or this table, there are other things in the universe perceive things?
So yeah, 100%. It's just a difference in perception. We have the capacity to perceive things in a way that a table doesn't, or a tree doesn't in the same way that we do. But like you said, just different states, right? So what's the difference between you and me, right? You've had your own...
A lot. 30 pounds of muscle from Mayank.
It's okay. You'll get there, little bro. The difference is like our life experiences have led us to different perspectives on the world, but like that's just our brains looking at things differently, right? There can only be one reality, right? Like let's just say that the glass is half empty versus half full. There is some water in the glass. That's a reality. One person sees it as half full. One person sees it as half empty. Every single human is just that thing perceiving the same thing in a different way. There's always like, well, what's that? Like moral relativism? No, that's not what I'm talking about. I don't know what the phrase is. I don't even know where I was going with that one. But essentially, to answer your question, everything is literally the exact same, just being seen from different points of view. You know how, like, if there's a shattered mirror, it's just reflecting the same thing from very, very different angles. Again, I don't even know what the question was anymore. But yes,
all the time. So, just diving a little bit deeper into
Yeah.
you, I, all these things around us, everything that exists in your eyes is one. And I can see that. So how do you differentiate agency and free will and predestination? Like when we look at everything that is, that was, and that will be, how do you kind of reconcile that stuff? Like, are you an individual agent with free will separate from the other manifestations of the universe that might be this room or, the city that we're in or this planet? Like, what's the distinction there?
So pretty much anybody can do whatever they want to, right? As humans, we have
Really though?
full agency.
Same thing?
I mean, it's kind of like our body is like one thing, right? Cells can do whatever they want to do, It's like individually, they can do whatever they want and they all just go towards one collective thing. So like you zoom out, everything is one, whatever, abstract. Which like that's, yeah, I believe in that. But at the same time, if you really zoom in, right, we are just individuals doing our own thing. I don't think those ideas are at odds with each other, that if I reached across this table and like hit your arm, right? Like I can do that if I want to. If you want to punch me back because you're a boxer, like, yeah, like you can do that, right? But it's like, okay, just because we're all one doesn't mean there's a lack of agency for any one of those things, right? Like, oh, we're one as the human race, but you go further down, we're all different. Oh, our body is just one thing. You go further down, it's like, okay, it's the heart, it's the lungs, it's the nerves. It's like, okay, you go further down again, the heart is made up of a ton of different things that are all doing different things. So,
and when you go further down, there's so many microorganisms.
Yeah.
So what exactly are we? Are we a composite of all these, bacterial components in our guts that influence like how we think, like what exactly,
So exactly, right? Like the definition, like if you define things, right? I couldn't define myself without defining something else, right? So like, for example, if you, let's take it away from humans because that's a little bit more complicated. If you look at a saw, right, like one that cuts down a tree, what do you think defines a saw? Is it the pointed stuff? That's like not a rhetorical question.
Sure. Yeah, like the blade?
Yeah, the blade. If the points define the blade, right, those are important, but just as important are the spaces in between that blade.
Mm-hmm.
The saw can be defined by the points, but the points do not exist without the spaces. In the same way, I can say that I am a kind person, right? But I could not define myself without the concept of like that someone else is hateful. And if the definition of me depends on the definition of something else, I cannot exist without that something else, correct? The points can't exist without the gaps. I cannot exist without defining something else. And if my own definition necessarily includes something else, then where does that difference start, right? And again, complex. So let's take it to another example. Where does the sun stop, right? Is it within the fusion reactions at its core? Does it stop like when it gets to Mercury and the sun rays hit Mercury, right? Are the rays where the sun ends? Does it end in like this ball that we've just arbitrarily defined? So it's like, okay, where do I end and where does something else start? And if where you end, like normally we would say that I am this body, right? I end right here. But my body can't be defined by the space, or it cannot be defined unless you account for the space around it. So then it's like, okay, if that space is necessary for me to define myself, then that space also is me, because I cannot be defined without that something else.
This kind of explanation reminds me of some philosophers talking about enlightenment, and we discussed this. So enlightenment to you is it twofold, like understanding and thinking it and then experiencing it? Like what is enlightenment? Like this whole concept of it's kind of like interesting for me, right? Because I'm really just separated by agency and I'm separate from the universe, but listening to you, like we're very much connected. And it's just like what we think is the beginning and the end is really what, how we perceive things.
Right.
So how does enlightenment function in this world, like with those two bases of thinking and experiencing?
So enlightenment is fully experiential. There's three levels, right? There's the regular thinking mind. Then you can go below that thinking, whether it's through sleep, through alcohol, through drugs. You kind of go below that conscious ability, right? Spirituality, part of it, is about going beyond thinking what exists above that. So enlightenment is fully going above your mind, because if you think about it, your mind is nothing more than just preconceived notions. It's just conditioning from the rest of the world, right? Can you really look at anything objectively, knowing that all of your experiences have been subjective? Everything you've gone through has been subjective. So how can you have an objective view on reality? And what spirituality tries to do is to get an objective view of what reality really is. People who are enlightened are in a constant state of an objective view of reality, and they're not being held back by their mind. Thinking helps you get there, but at the end of the day, you know how you stoke a fire with a stick? You are stoking the fire of enlightenment with a stick, but at the end of it, you throw that stick into the fire too, and you go fully beyond thinking. That's not to say that you never think again. It's just that you realize that a thinking is a part of you. It's not the only thing about you.
Interesting. So right now we are thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
How does one experience this?
How to go beyond it? So people experience it through meditation, right? Being fully present is a way to go beyond thinking. Right now, the listener and you, if you really focus on your breath, just taking a deep breath in and exhaling, if you're fully focused on that breath, you are fully aware, but you cannot think. If you're really looking at a tree, correct? Like, you're not thinking because you're fully engaged with that sense. And that's the goal. If you are fully present, you are way, way, way closer to enlightenment than you think. It's just being in presence constantly. It's like not some abstract concept. It's just that, okay, going beyond your mind, just be fully present. And it's realizing that thinking is a tool. It's kind of like, okay, you can think consciously. Oh, okay. So there's this really, really cool book that I read. It's called The Untethered Soul, which is an incredibly logical approach to what spirituality actually is. Changed my life. Oprah also loves the book, if I'm not enough of an authority figure on that. But in the follow-up book to The Untethered Soul, the author, Michael Singer, he talks about what is the human experience. There is thought, emotion, and external experience. Those are the only three things. He goes deeper into it. There are two different kinds of thought. There is the conscious thinking, and then there's automatic thinking. Things like anxiety and depression are automatic thinking. Oh my God, nobody loves me. Oh my goodness, like I'm going to get fired. Like all of these things, they're just automatic. You don't choose to think them. It's just kind of running on in the background. Conscious thinking is the kind of thinking that made rockets get to the moon. It's we figured out how to make microscopes. It's we figured out electricity. There was conscious intent to figure something out. Then there's automatic thinking. Then there's, of course, emotions and the external world. That, for most people, takes up their entire lived experience. And spirituality is realizing, it's just being aware of all of this stuff that, hey, I'm thinking, hey, I'm feeling this emotion. And again, it's not complicated. It's just being present and realizing that, like, oh, this is going on. Outside, you can see birds flying. Inside, you can see that your mind is thinking. It's just a tool for you to use. But a lot of people are fully lost within that tool, as in, like, they don't know how to go beyond their thinking. They think that thinking defines who they are. Another really, really cool thing that I heard was that, was it Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am? The person that I was listening to, he said that Descartes was so close. I think, therefore I am is backwards. It's actually you are, therefore you think. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there's this wider perspective to see your life from, and your thoughts aren't everything.
It's really deep, really interesting. So just one more question about this whole collective, in universe concept. You say a lot of the time, like, the universe has got my back. What does that mean?
Going back to your question about agency, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have agency over my actions. I have no agency over the way that other people react, right? In the same way that you can love someone in a quote unquote perfect way and they might not reciprocate it, right? You have agency over what you do. You don't have agency over how someone else reacts. So when I say that the universe has my back, I very legitimately think that yeah, I do my best and the universe will take care of everything else to make sure that I get what I want. Sometimes, not all the time, sometimes. So for example, right? Imagine you get the perfect spot at a mall, correct? How do you get that perfect spot? You have to leave your house at the right time. All the lights have to align for you to get to that parking spot at the right time. The traffic has to be a specific way. Another person has to pull out from that parking spot at the right time that you get there, right? If another car gets there before you, you don't get that spot. Now keep going further. That person leaves that parking spot at the right time because they shopped for a specific amount of time. They found their stuff in a specific amount of time. They left their home at a specific time. So for you to find that perfect parking spot, so much else has to go on for that actually to manifest, right? In the same way, I can do what I can do that's under my control. If I want to get buff, maybe I shouldn't eat 5,000 calories of junk food a day, right? I have agency over my actions, but then for other people to react in a specific way, all that is outside my control. For example, me getting this job, I almost never ever scroll down LinkedIn, but that one day I scrolled down for 3 more seconds. I saw a post by Darnell Leatherwood, one of your good friends, and I only met Darnell because I went to a get-together that Manu hosted a couple of years ago, I believe. I don't really go out, but because it was Manu, I went out that day. I am normally introverted, but whenever I'm outside, I try to meet new people. So I talked to Darnell. We connected on LinkedIn. A year later, I scrolled down on LinkedIn for 5 more seconds or 3 more seconds than I normally do. I see that Darnell shares a post about this very job, right? All of that is outside of my control. I had my little portions here and there, yeah, I scrolled, yeah, I contacted Darnell on LinkedIn, yeah, I met him, yeah, I went to see Manu. But me seeing that post at that exact time, I don't have any control of the algorithm, correct? So, okay, I apply for this position. I have my resume that goes through their approval process. I work the hardest I've ever worked in my life to make sure that I'm going to kill this interview, right? That is my agency. But is it within my agency that everybody who interviewed me sees me in a good light compared to everybody else? Is it under my agency that everybody else interviews worse than I did or laterally? Is it under my agency that, you guys discuss who's the best candidate and I somehow come out on top? Yeah, I did my work to be one of the best in that pool of applicants. Everything else outside of my control. But it kind of worked out. And if this didn't work out for me, something else would have worked out. And I still would have said that the universe has my back because I just have a predisposition that things work out. And either it makes you stronger or it makes you happier. And I think everything falls into those 2 buckets.
For sure. I think that's an interesting perspective. And I just want to address some of the questions I have about that. So the bulk of what you just said is essentially the perfect set of dominoes. This thing led to this thing, led to this thing. And if we really wanted to extrapolate from that, we could go back to our own past, our education, our parents, how our parents met, and keep going back and back and back. With this particular example of you getting this job, you mentioned a lot of things about your own agency, the hard work and determination that you put into everything around this job application. I guess I'm struggling to understand at what point does the universe have your back in that?
So I guess you could go as granular as you want, right? Like you said, we can go back to our parents, we can go back to our ancestors. Whenever people say that, I'm a self-made man, it's Okay, did you create electricity? Did you create the car that you drove in? Did you create the roads that people drive on? Did you create the food? Did you grow it? Did you drive it? Were you the person who like ran the plumbing so that you could wash it at home? Did you create the knife? Did you create the stove, et cetera, right? All of these things for me are things to be incredibly, incredibly grateful for. And of course, I'm not grateful for it for like 24/7 because I have to consciously think about it. But in moments when I do think about it, it's like all of these things are the universe having my back to create the perfect concoction of an environment or of a situation where I can use my own agency to succeed, right? If electricity was never made, like, I don't get this job. This job doesn't exist if electricity was never made, you know? In all of these ways, the universe has my back. The fact that I went through all of these experiences that made me qualified enough to be in this position, like, yeah, I worked hard to be a social media strategist, to be a brand strategist, to be good at data, to be competent at operations. I worked hard to be qualified at all those things, but the universe had my back to put me in situations where I could become all of those things, right? I didn't choose to, I applied to 100 jobs. The universe, whatever. And, this is so interesting because if you get really deep into it, right? Like everybody else has their own agency. You had the agency to select me. Everybody else on the selection committee had the agency to select me. The quote unquote universe put me in situations to be good at what I do. That's other people pushing me to be good at what I do, right? All of these agencies coming together, I guess, can be considered quote unquote the universe. All of these dominoes, all of these people perfectly aligning for me to get into a place where I wanted to be. The universe is just an interesting way to make it all abstract and put it all under one word. But it's just everybody's agencies working together, putting me in a place where my agency can go much further.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because when I first heard you say the universe has my back, it almost struck me as a dangerous line of thinking where, no matter what you do, like, it's predestination, like it is what it is, whatever happens will happen, right? But I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're actually referring to is a very humble and holistic viewpoint of where we are today. All these things that we enjoy, whether it's clothing, America, the internet, like these are all things that we all really take for granted, but lead us to a position where we can create our own agency, which are our own thoughts and our own paths. It's very interesting. With the whole concept of, this universal soul, like Atman, like all of us being connected, tying this into our first kind of thought, is the ultimate direction of everything love? Is that the ultimate manifestation of everything that's happening here? Is that that's the mission of the universe?
So it's so a lot of the spiritual people that I listen to, some of them are very, very Eastern focused. They just go from Eastern philosophy. Some of them combine Western logic with Eastern thinking. And that logical approach to Eastern spirituality is really, really interesting to me. One of those speakers, Alan Watts, have you heard of him? One of the things that he talks about is that all of this is just a play, right? The entire universe is just a play, and we are people on a stage. And as he's talking throughout this 1 hour lecture, he gives this thought experiment. Imagine that you have every single thing that you could ever want. Everything in life goes perfectly. Literally everything you could ever desire is yours. After a while, you would kind of get bored, right? Like, okay, I have everything that I want. Like, this is no longer exciting. In the beginning, you'd be excited, but then it'd be like, okay, whatever. So then you would want things to not go the way that you wanted to. You no longer want to have a perfect walk every time. Sometimes you trip and it's like, oh my God, like so exciting. Like, I didn't know that could happen, right? And then as you keep going, you ask in whatever this hypothetical situation is, like, you know what? I want some competition. I don't know if I'm going to win. I don't want to know if like things will turn out the way that I want them to. And you do this slowly, right? You do this at lower stakes. Like, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to get 100 on this math test. Maybe you get a 90. I don't know if I'm going to win like this one-on-one basketball game. Things get more exciting when things don't go the way that you want, right? So in this example, and of course he's more eloquent about all of this, and he eventually says, we get to a place of existence as it is today. The universe is playing out all of these different things. Again, going back to what we said, everything's consciousness, right? All of this consciousness is like a real thing. We're just experiencing our own little part of this consciousness. So what he says is that the universe doesn't want to know how things end up. It wants to have fun. It got bored with everything being perfect. And now we're in a place with wars, and we're in a place with famine, blah, blah, blah. And of course, those are really, really serious things that I don't mean to demean. But in this specific case, he's like, the universe just wants to experience everything that's out there to experience. And once it's done with that, everything goes back to peace because now it's seen everything there is to see. There's this story by Andy Weir, Weir, called The Egg. And I guess I'll spoil it because for the sake of the podcast, essentially, this person dies and he starts talking to God. He's like, okay, wait, are you God? Is this heaven? And God's like, nope. And he's like, the guy who just died, he talks about like, okay, so what am I going to be reincarnated next? Like, okay, I'm dead. I know that, like, you just told me that reincarnation exists. Who am I to be next? And the God says, you're going to be a Chinese farmer in the 6th century. And the guy's like, wait, I'm going back in time and I'm going back as a woman? What? And God says, okay, well, time is like kind of your own construct, whatever. But he's like, wait, how can I be reincarnated as someone that already existed? And God says that, like, that's just how it is. You are going to be born as that farmer. Then your next iteration will be as someone in the 22nd century, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually they come to this point where the guy realizes that, wait, I am going to be born as every single person that ever existed. And God says, yeah. He said, so I'll be reincarnated as Hitler. And God says, you'll also be reincarnated as every single Jew that he killed. I'll be reincarnated as Gandhi, and you'll be reincarnated as every single person that Gandhi saved. And the entire point was that you will experience every single human experience there is to be lived through, and then you will reach enlightenment. And the point of that story is just that we will experience everything there is to experience for our own growth. We go through life as being different people. Like, oh, I was an immature kid. Then I was a kid who was reckless. Then I was a kid who was more stoic. Then I became an adult who had everything under control. Then I became a man with a family. Then I became somebody who had a midlife crisis. We go through all of these experiences. Now take that to an immense humanitarian scale. And to answer your question, like, oh, is the mission of everything peace and love? I think a different way to phrase it would be like everything returns to where it came from, which is peace.
So that last point that you just shared, where 10-year-old Mayank is quite different than 21-year-old Mayank and angry Mayank, and happy Mayank. There's this concept called the ship of Theseus, where you can take away all the parts of a ship, deconstruct the ship, and then construct the ship with all the same parts. And the philosophical question there is it the same ship as before? Taken from that, this whole concept of reincarnation and just experiencing the multitude of human emotions and human lives. I guess, question one is just like, are you the same person as you were yesterday? And going past that, like, how does that expand into really reaching true enlightenment? Like, is the way to enlightenment in one facet reflecting on your past and seeing how there's different iterations of you? Or is it really learning more about the human experience, like, through content, essentially? Like, there's a great quote about reading, which was, hundreds of millions of people have come before you, and hopefully more in the future if we don't destroy our planet. And one of the best ways to really just experience other humans' lives is through reading, right? So I was curious what you think about that. Like, how do we actually tap into potential paths towards enlightenment and really understanding other human experiences?
To answer your first question, am I the same person as I was yesterday? What that makes me think of is can you ever step into the same river twice? And that kind of goes into like, okay, what is a river? Like if I step in at 1 second, then I step in a second later, the water molecules are different. The speed of the current might be just a little bit different. The fishes around might be at different places. The river is never the same, but it is the river, right? So in the same way, whoever I am as a personality might not be the same. Like some of my atoms are different. My thought patterns are still the same, but like what I might be thinking at that time is different. All of those things, such as a river, might change, but who I am, I'm not the personality. I'm just a person who's aware of this personality, right? And it's like, if I constantly changed, would I even recognize my past self and my future self? Like, what is the constant where we can be aware of all of this change from? I am that point of awareness. I am not this personality that has changed over the years. I'm not this body that has changed over the years. I'm just a person who's aware of all of it. So am I the same Mayank as yesterday? Well, it depends on what you define Mayank as. Am I the personality, or am I the Mayank that's aware of all of this? It's like, yeah, the Mayank was aware of all this. That person just existed forever. That point of awareness will forever be constant. Personality will change. The way that we exist day after day changes. Not in terms of like routine or anything, just like little differences, right? Where you can kind of say like, oh, today's different than the past day. Whatever. Essentially, no, I don't think I'm a different Mayank as I was yesterday from this specific framework. And with regards to your last question, that steps to enlightenment and how can we like go about the human experience, I think it's very, very interesting. I wonder if other people go through this as well. But sometimes I have a very specific thought pattern, right? For example, I am not one that gets jealous of other people's success because like, hey, good for you. Like you're thriving in your own lane. I'm doing my stuff. But sometimes randomly I'll have these thoughts like, dang, I wish that happened for me, right? And then immediately I'll catch myself. I'm like, wow, that was a thought that I almost never have. And I just had it. And then my next thought is like, oh, so this is how other people think. I just had an experience that didn't fit my own way of life. And I'm like, oh, this is how other people live life, right? And you know how in anime, they make food look absolutely delicious. I'm a vegetarian, but when I see like animated hamburgers and fries and like steaks, I'm like, God damn, that looks kind of good. I would never eat it, but in that headspace, I'm like, oh wow, so this is how other people see meat in like real life, So I think just kind of understanding that your experience of the world is very, very, very subjective, I think is a good starting point, just to realize that your outlook on the world isn't like the law of the land. It isn't always right, Like half the people in the world believe in one thing, the other half believe in the opposing thing, like Republicans and liberals, for example. It's like, yeah, the way that you think isn't the world, like that isn't truth. That's just your way of how you think things should be. The other side has a different view. It's like just realizing that, oh, this is my specific experience, I think is a good path towards enlightenment. Just realizing that like, hey, this isn't truth. This is just one way of experiencing what the world is, because enlightenment is nothing more than just rising above your thinking, right? Realizing that your thinking is just a manifestation of thought patterns. And not to say that those thought patterns are wrong, right? Like, of course, we shouldn't kill people, right? Like, I think that's something that almost everybody can agree upon, or most people can agree upon. But it's also just realizing, like, you know what? That's a thought, and I believe in it. But this is not like, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it in a way that also makes sense to you, because these things are just like kind of ingrained in me to some extent. So like bringing it out into words feels like, oh, how would I describe just this like intrinsic belief that I've held for a while? But I guess to be a little bit more succinct about it, getting closer to enlightenment is just rising above your thinking, which means realizing that you are thinking, which means realizing that your thinking is a consequence of your experiences, and other people's thinking is also a consequence of their experiences. Being less judgmental is a really, really good way to get closer towards enlightenment. Enlightenment's like a big word. I would rather just say peace, I think, would also be analogous to some extent.
So it's really fascinating that you said that the ultimate kind of end game of the universe is peace, because at least the way I see it is there's a ton of entropy. It's entropy everywhere and chaos everywhere. Even among our species, like up until this century, it's been marred by violence and famine and disease, and we're one of the few species that I think, I'm not a zoologist, that actively like engages in pretty significant violence against itself, right? More so than just like other species competing for mates and resources. It's like pretty intense violence. You still believe, despite all of that, the natural order of things is going towards harmony? Like, for example, like just looking into the future, especially as artificial intelligence proliferates, and let's say it reaches, a singularity point, like, head of future Google Ray Kurzweil writes, at the point where AI becomes so smart that it creates its own artificial intelligence, right? The point where it really becomes more intelligent than humans. That future of the universe that we're headed towards, benevolence is still the end game?
So one, entropy is super, super interesting to me. So I'll get that out of the way first and then answer your bigger question. Entropy always increases, right? That's what physics says. And yeah, sure, it's true. Entropy is randomness. But if randomness constantly increases from the Big Bang all the way to now, all the way until the heat death, then I don't know, stars formed. Stars are very, very ordered. Galaxies formed. They are very, very, very ordered. Just on our planet, plant life it's extremely harmonious for it to even exist. Human life, things need to be very, very, very ordered for that to exist. An increasing amount of randomness has led to an increasing amount of order on a smaller scale, right? Like, there was complete chaos at the beginning of the universe with just energy and atoms bouncing around. That randomness has led to a ton of order right now.
In the limited part of the universe that we observe, right?
Yes. And it's like, okay, if entropy increases, a consequence of that entropy has also been an incredible amount of order, right? And to kind of make it a little bit analogous to what's happened over humanity, a ton of pain happened for us to come to the point where we are today. Famine happened, but then globalization also happened. So now we have food year round. That if a famine occurs in some place, we have food from the rest of the world. A lot of people died out of disease. Now we have hospitals that treat all these diseases that would have killed us 100 years ago, 150 years ago, right? Something as quote unquote simple as penicillin saved tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives. That's a big number, but like whatever the accurate number is, it's like, yeah, a lot of anger, war, fighting, human rights violations of unbelievable magnitudes happened, but today they happen less. They don't happen as horrifically as they used to. Things are still horrific today if you think about the way that some ethnicities are treated, but it's not as widespread as it used to be. And that's not to minimize what's going on right now, but it's like we are evidence-based trending towards a better future. We are living in that better future, you know? So yeah, is the end game benevolence? Like, we're trending towards it. More and more people care about the earth. More and more people care about climate change. More and more people care about entrepreneurship to solve problems in a way that they haven't been solved before. So it's like, yeah, maybe it just depends on what time frame that you choose, right? You choose a time frame from 200,000 years ago to like 1,000 BC. Like, yeah, everything sucks. Everything sucks, right? You choose a time period between the 1930s to 1945, everything sucks again, right? But like, it just depends on what timeline that you choose. That yeah, things overall since 1945 to right now, things also sucked a lot between then, but they also got better between then, you know, and just kind of depends on what you choose and what kind of weight do you put on specific things to decide whether is evil increasing, is goodness increasing. I don't have an issue, but I do have a concern with people say like, oh, the world is a terrible place. The world sucks. Everything's going to trash. And it's like, okay, like, thank you for, you know, just ignoring like the tens of millions of people who are just trying to live good lives, who are being good neighbors, who open doors, who give food to people on the streets. Like, all right, yeah, the world sucks. So like, okay, cool. The world sucks if you ignore like 100 million people who are just actively good people, and if not actively good, at least passively good, who don't increase suffering in the world. So it's like, do things trend towards benevolence? It's like an incredible amount of people are decent people. It's like, yeah, if you want to put more weight on the things that suck, then like, that's your choice. That isn't necessarily reflective of reality.
Yeah. You know, I was at the Palace of Versailles, right outside Paris in France. You know, there was the home of Louis the Sun King, who at the time was probably the most powerful monarch in Europe, and, you know, one of the most powerful kings in the world. Like, this is when the French Empire was really stretching. The guides there mentioned that, you know, he had so much wealth and opulence surrounding him. I mean, it was a golden palace, essentially. All the nobility lived with him. He maintained absolute power. You know, he had several mistresses, tons of good food. But they also mentioned that the average human today in the developed world, if we want to call it that, has access to better food, better healthcare, a broader view of the world, more information, right? Even if we want to just compare his love life, like more opportunities for finding like a perfect mate. I mean, that was just really eye-opening, right? And that was only a couple hundred years ago. So it's really neat that you shared that this randomness, that entropy leads to order and a better future, which I hope holds true. Our conversation has really made me rethink quite a bit. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger gave a speech. I think it was a graduation speech where he said he, like you, also hates the term self-made man. And I agreed with it. I'm like, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and it was mostly limited to my own circle. My parents, my colleagues, my co-founders, like all the people in my life. But the way you see it is far deeper than that. It's like, okay, we have electricity because of, you know, we have, you know, cities here, we have this country here, and that's just really, really fascinating. And when we really extrapolate from that and go back and back, the way you see the world is, you know, and again, interject if I'm wrong here, you and I at some level are the same. And we are both also the same in one of the universe, which is a difficult concept to really accept, at least for me, because I think a lot of my life I've taken a lot of initiative and hard work, planning, agency, drive, vision for myself. And I attribute a lot of, you know, if we want to call it success, to that. It's almost existential to think about that in some ways. Like, at least for me, I can see myself getting lazy if I'm just like, oh, we're all the same. The universe has my back. Things will figure themselves out. I think I thrive when I understand the concept of us being similar atoms, but me being a different manifestation with my own agency. I think that makes sense. Is there anything that anchors you when you think about just how existential this thought is, or that's where you find your peace? And if so, what advice do you have to someone like me?
I'm going to cough real quick and we can cut that out. Can you first like explain a little bit what do you mean by existential before I answer that, just so I understand like what I'm responding to?
Sure. It's just like, what's the point? What's the point of decision making? What's the point of working hard? It's one of the struggles I've had with an omniscient, all powerful, all knowing deity. I'm not saying much deeper about that, but it's just, what's the point if everything is already predetermined?
I don't think everything is predetermined, and that's like a whole rabbit hole to go down into. But specifically,
please go in.
I will, but I'll answer your question
Here's
first.
The carrot.
I'll answer your question first. Like, where do I find my peace and what grounds me? It's just like, yeah, whenever I've stepped into those moments of awareness where I've gone beyond my mind, that's peace right there. It's like every single thing that has brought discomfort to me. Oh, okay. There's this really cool analogy that I came up with, and I normally don't take credit for things, but this is something that I think is actually really cool. All this like self-healing talk, right? It's like, oh, you need to work through your trauma. You need to understand and like untie all these knots and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, you are trying to find the eye of the storm. The storm is your life, and all these things like healing and self-care and blah, blah, blah. Not to say those are bad things, but you're trying to find the eye of the storm as the storm outside of you changes, correct? To find that peace. But the truth is, you're not in that storm at all. You're the person outside the storm that knows that the storm exists. Your mind is the thing that's trying to find the eye within the storm, is trying to find peace based on all of these like millions of different things that are going on in your life. You are the person outside of it who sees that a storm is happening and that your mind is struggling, right? So where do I find my peace? Like, I think that's a very, very mental question. It's like, okay, how do you find the eye of the storm? And I'm like, I'm not in the storm. And of course, that's like easier to say right now compared to when I'm actually struggling through something that's going on in life. But finding my peace is more just about like realizing that, yeah, I'm just an experiencer. Like, I am sitting in a movie theater and like all of this is just happening on a screen. And I'm not detached from it in any way, but it's just realizing like, oh my God, this is such a cool experience to have. Like, you go up 2 miles into the sky, the human experience stops existing, right? Like, you go anywhere in the solar system, none of this exists. You go to the closest star, Proxima Centauri, I think. This doesn't exist for 4 light years. And I am here and I get to experience heartbreak, and I get to experience having a good job and a really cool boss. I'm obligated to say that. It's like, this doesn't exist anywhere else. So I find my peace just knowing that like, all right, this is just an experience. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And it really, really sucks sometimes. Like, sometimes I'm on the verge of tears. Sometimes I'm crying out of anxiety. Sometimes I don't want to get out of bed. It's like, yeah, sometimes I get lost in the movie. And, oh, okay, this is a really, really cool analogy that I've heard about what does it really mean to be outside of this like hypothetical storm. So imagine you're watching a movie, right? Your eyes and your ears are engaged. Cool. If you really like the movie, you're lost in that movie for like 2 hours. But say that you're kind of bored and you're thinking like, oh, what am I going to eat after this? Like, I have like homework to do when I get home, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, your mind can still do other things, correct? But now imagine that you can touch and you can smell whatever the character on the screen can touch or smell. Now it's a lot harder to get distracted because every touch sensation, every nasal sensation is also yours. A lot harder to get distracted. Now imagine that you feel the character's emotions. Imagine that you can feel and think exactly what they think. How much space does your mind have to really think about food later or homework or any of that? It will be it will almost be impossible to break out of that, right? You'll forget that you're sitting in the movie theater. And that was the analogy to like, how are we living life? And it's like, we are so engrossed in this character that we forget that we're just watching it all happen. And of course, we have full agency over what we make that character do in terms of our life. But it's kind of like, you're kind of playing a game almost. And again, that's not to trivialize like everything that goes on in our lives, but it's like, yeah, you're engrossed in all these experiences, but you're not the experience, you're the experiencer. You're the person who's aware of everything that's going on. So like to go back to finding peace, it's like, yeah, I find my peace just by reminding myself that like, yeah, I am the person who is seeing all of this happen. Like, that's it. I'm not an anxious person. I'm a person going through anxiety. I am not a spiritual person. I'm just a person who is able to go down a spiritual path. I am not scared. I'm a person who has fear from time to time. I am not humble. I am just a person who exhibits characteristics of humility. And then just realizing that whatever this point of awareness is, that's one step. And then this is, again, another tangent. And I know there was a different tangent to go down on from before. In spirituality, they say that that place of awareness is how you start to meet God. And God, in spiritual terms, is literally just that universal consciousness. Jesus is a manifestation of it. Buddha is a manifestation of it. You're also a manifestation of it. But until you reach that point of where you're just aware of everything that's going on, it's very, very hard to quote unquote, or to meet quote unquote God. And it's like, where do I find my peace? And it's like, yeah, being that close to God is where I find my peace. And God is not a separate thing. It's just like realigning with who I really, really am, which is not my personality. It's my experience, or it's the experiencer.
It's fascinating because, you know, when I first listened to your philosophy and how you view life, it seems in a lot of ways diametrically opposed to how I perceive things. But at the end of the day, I find peace in control and ownership, especially of sensations and emotions. So what you just described, you know, like, for example, if I'm going through a very tough workout or combat in martial arts, like it sucks, but then at some point to push through it, like my mind says like, I'm just experiencing discomfort. I'm a person experiencing discomfort in this moment, right? And I can push past it. I'm a person experiencing sadness, you know, and it's just like separating the two, truly being stoic about it, not worrying about things past my control. And again, just taking control and ownership over Manu, over me. So that's really fascinating. I feel like we're reaching the same conclusion, but we're in kind of different paths.
Yeah.
You're high up in the mountains.
I do think that like a lot of the stuff that I say, right, I never say trying to convince anybody of it. It's just like, yeah, this is what I think. If you want to like talk about it, cool. If you want to convince me otherwise, cool. Like show me that like there's a different way to look at life. And it's very, very interesting that the way that I see it and the way that Stoicism sees it, for me, realizing that I don't really have control about what the world does past my own locus of control, that's what gives me peace. And I think for you as well, peace is just like, actually, I'm interested in how you would characterize it, because you said that you find peace in control. And I find control in realizing that I don't really have that much of it.
That's a good question. I feel like everything that I do is determined by discipline and ownership. So whether it's exercise, whether it's work, whether it's my respect of what we perceive as time, I think time is kind of one of the governing principles. So for me, it's just I have control on, and I'm lucky to say that, on what I choose to do with my time. And that's, I think, where it revolves around. It's just like I have control over what I choose to do with my time. I have the independence, agency, and ability to do what I want with my time. And that's what gives me peace. If someone else was telling me what to do, if I was doing things I didn't want to do, if I felt limited anyway, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, I would be very different.
I wonder if, like, what is the underlying thing that connects your perspective and my perspective? Because what I think, I'm just gonna think out loud the way I have been for the last hour and 9 minutes.
This is the most I'm ever gonna let him talk.
Yeah, this one.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, this might not even get released.
He might not be employed by the end of this.
Yeah, so I have no agency over how iVenture is run.
It's a dictatorship, let's be honest.
I'm just a pawn in the scheme. Not even a bishop or a knight or anything.
I'll waste you on $1 billion. I'm just kidding. Mayank is invaluable to our operation. That's on the record.
Sorry, did you mean unvaluable?
He's the domino that makes everything topple over.
Yeah, everything sucks for a little while.
Things have gotten tremendously better after Mayank has joined our team. Not to say anything about our team before, but things have always just been improving. We've been very lucky to have incredible people join in our important work here.
It's very interesting, just the focus on, and this is not cut. I'm just ignoring what he just said. I'm just moving on back to the question. We're not cutting this or anything. I think we both focus on what we do have agency about. Like, for example, the fact that I don't care like what this other person on social media did to this other person on social media. I don't care about that beef. I don't care what's going on in some like disconnected part of anything, right? Like, this is what I can focus on. This is what I have control on. I'll just focus on this. Everything else, whatever, Maybe that's why both of us find peace. Like, I know that I don't really have control of much. So I just focus on like me, You're like, I find you say you have peace in your control. So you're just focused on things that you have control on in the same way that I am. And we're both kind of like, yeah, whatever else happens, like happens. Like, this has nothing to do with our world. Maybe that is a point of connection in our differing ways of approaching the world.
Absolutely. Something my father told me was, essentially do your best. And then, if you fail, you fail.
Right.
Doesn't matter. You did your best. So I think that's been a driving force in my work ethic. Like, whatever I wanted to do, I tried to do it to the best of my ability. And if things don't work out, but I know I did everything that I could, right? Like, it's kind of like Kobe Bryant towards like the end of his career. Like, he didn't want to go into retirement and ask, what if? I think that's the one emotion that I don't think is a good one. It's okay for heartbreak, sadness, happiness, anger. I think one of the worst things you can feel is regret. Like, what if? Because you can never resolve that.
One really, when people say things aren't going to work out, it's like, yeah, according to who? Like, how are you arrogant enough to know what like working out even means, right? It's like, oh, you were depressed for 2 years and you think you wasted your entire life. But then because of it, you became a person who found your perfect partner 4 years later. Did things really not work out? It's just different time frames, right? You failed at your first company and your second company, but your third one got valued at like $100 million. Like, did things really not work out? It's like, yeah, you can just choose shorter time frames. You can choose longer time frames. It's like, things not working out is just like some arbitrary number or some arbitrary amount of time for not working out, Like, you get fired. Did it not work out? Did you find an incredible job afterwards? Did it really not work out? It kind of worked out in your favor, right? Michael Jordan didn't make his high school basketball team. Oh, it didn't work out. I bet Michael Jordan had a terrible life. It's like, come on. It's just up to you how good or bad you want your life to be. And of course, there's things that really, really, really suck. But it's easier to make them better when you realize that, like, yeah, things suck right now, but they can get better.
This conversation is really helping me develop a lot more empathy and I think humility. because for the longest time, I'm not saying I'm self-made at all, but I took a lot of perhaps pride in like, oh, you know what? Things that, my first company, my first startup failed, but, that led me on this path of entrepreneurship where I was building things, eventually becoming the director of this program, right? Like, it's just like these things kind of worked out. I never said that the universe has my back. I always said I have my back, right? But in some way, like the way you and I are thinking about at least our professional journeys and I guess our spiritual growth is it's kind of similar. We are saying different things, but we're kind of reaching a similar conclusion, it seems.
And it's really interesting what you mentioned about
we are just seeing different perspectives of the same end goal.
Right. And earlier you were asking, like, not in this podcast, before we started recording this, you were asking, why do you think we get along so well?
We don't. I'm sick of this guy. Save me. I'm blinking.
No, he's not. He hasn't blinked once this entire time. I think, like, whatever resonance that we have, right? Part of it is just like stuff that can't be put into words, not just between us, but like between any two people that relate really, really well. And I also don't feel a need to put it into words. Like, we get along, now we're sharing these thoughts, and it's like, oh wow, we really do have the same end goal or the same end perspective, even though we walk different paths to get there. And it's like, it's really interesting to explore that mentally. But with some of my friends that annoy the heck out of me, I'm like, why do we get along so well, right? And it's like, sometimes I don't think it really matters, like, why. It's just that it happens, and it's a lot more enjoyable to feel these things, as opposed to like, you know what, let me put 7 different reasons why I enjoy this, and then realize, like, you know what, are these reasons really good enough for me to really like this person that much? I think words sometimes, I don't know how often, but they diminish the actual experience itself. It's like, yeah, we get along really, really well. And I think mentally, this is a very cool kind of way to get to an understanding of why that happens. But sometimes I'm just like, wow, I am really, really grateful for the way that things are. And I don't need to know why that is. The feeling in itself is enough. And the words just kind of take away from it sometimes.
Since we're this far deep into things, if there are any students remaining, maybe we should talk about work. I want to tie some of this into what we talked about earlier. So we just talked about, why we get along hypothetically.
It's all just a show.
And then we talked earlier about, different styles of leadership, fear, love, respect. Why do you think our combined leadership effort works? And like, how do you see kind of both of our roles, and again, the context here is we run an entrepreneurship program for student entrepreneurs who build startups in our accelerator.
I think it's really, really cool because there's 2, and this is just off the top of my head, but there's 2 different parts of success. I'm sure there's more. One, actually doing it, right? Like, to succeed, you actually have to do stuff. But then success also partially is your mental and emotional state while you're accomplishing it. If you're forever like stuck in anxiety and depression, like, you're not really going to be able to do the first part, which is actually doing the stuff. There needs to be some part of it where you're taking care of yourself, where it's like, okay, mentally, I just need someone to listen. Emotionally, I just need to get these emotions out, right? You very much, with your strategic role and your strat chats and how you guide all the students in very, very, very concrete ways on this is how you succeed with the business. This is probably not the best route to go down on. This is completely wrong. You're on the right track. That is a very, very important part of leading an entrepreneurship program. Like, how are you going to lead one if you don't know how to run a successful business, right? And then on the other hand, in my short tenure here thus far, is, okay, like, things are hard. You want to talk to someone? Like, I got you. You need to get stuff off your chest so you can do things better. I got you. You are more than just an entrepreneur. You're a human. Don't like put yourself in one lane kind of thing. So I really feel like I provide that space where students can feel free to talk. And I think we both discount ourselves on the opposite sides of this. I think you are also a very comforting person to talk to, in the same way that I don't really talk about my hard skills in terms of like operations, social media, data, all those things. It's like, yeah, I'm good at those. I just focus on a different thing. Yeah, you're really good at leading businesses or showing people how to lead a business. But yeah, you're also a person that people come to talk about their deeper thoughts. And we kind of put ourselves into this bucket like, oh, I'm the strat person or I'm the emotions person. But I think we both have balances of it. We both balance on different sides. But I think it works well because we focus on different sides, but it also works well because we have both sides to it.
Yeah, I think it's a incredibly complementary leadership package, bounded by respect and I was going to say lack of ego, but my uncle does abuse me every now and then. Throws a couple punches here.
Someone's got to show a boxer where they stand.
That's true. Yeah, that's really interesting. And, you know, I just wanted to dive into that a little bit because a lot of our companies come in with a strong founder. There's a strong founder who sets the vision, sets the strategy for the company, is the ultimate evangelist for their product or service, who wills this thing into existence. And we also see a lot of companies struggle because one person is not enough to move the needle forward in a meaningful way. You can get a lot done. Absolutely. You know, we live in the age where, you know, AI, ChatGPT, all these internet tools, like you can run like a very successful enterprise with just one person. But sometimes to take it to the next level, like, you know, at least in our world with startups, like you need teammates. And I think our thing works really well because there is understanding of each other's skill sets. There is respect for the strengths of the other person. And there is also a mutual overlap in some of those skills. Like, you know, the caring for the students and stuff. I'll be honest, I don't really care about them as much as Mayank does. You know, but that's really neat. And I think that's blended together to really have a fairly strong and comprehensive leadership style. Because at the end of the day, leaders are servants and we are serving our student body. And I think between the two of us, we can cover most of the individual and professional needs of the crew, which is what we really need to do. So thank you, Mayank.
I got you by obligation or by choice. It's very interesting as you were saying that so far, this has just been mostly about iVenture, right? But then just with the larger entrepreneurial community, with the socials that we run, I think it's very, very cool to be a duo where it's like, yeah, you want like a smoothie that's not too sweet or not too tart, like we got you, like we're here, you know? And of course, that's not to speak about any other entrepreneurship programs on campus because, like, of course, they have their own dynamics, right? But I think the one that we have is something that I don't see too often in organizations or other programs, just in general, not just at the university. Like, you always hear like, wow, Steve Jobs, like, oh my God, he was good at what he does, but he was also just a really, really mean person, you know? Stuff like, who was the person that ran?
What do you really think about me, Mayank?
You know who was the person who ran Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, she was very, very hard on her people. There's the guy who's the guy in Seattle who like gave all of his employees $70K as the minimum salary.
The name escapes me, but I understand. I remember.
Yeah.
The CEO.
Then there's like Jack Dorsey who runs Twitter in his very, very specific way. There's all of these single people who define an entire company. And I think for a while, I have equated, and I think a lot of students have equated iVenture with Manu's really, really strong leadership. And I feel for one of the very, very few times in my life that like wow, I can really make this a duo that I can really add some value to a company at an organization at the highest level, where it's not like just one person who defines an entire thing, but I'm happy that I think I can be a person that can add a very, very meaningful dimension to iVenture leadership.
Absolutely. I totally agree. But, it could all go crumbling down from here.
It's possible.
But in all reality, I think that's just, we get asked about our leadership style all the time and why I hired Mayank, especially coming from such a competitive pool. And I think that's exactly the reason. There's no ego. Like, he is mission first. We align on the mission. We care about the work. It's just all about individual growth and development, helping educate the next generation, because the problems that we face in this world are kind of existential. They threaten the existence of humanity, and the only way to solve big problems is thinking outside the box, is thinking entrepreneurial. You care about the work, you care about the students. There's no ego here. Yeah, I agree. I am hoping that iVenture becomes bigger than me. It is bigger than me, but at a leadership level, I hope it's, and I think you're 100% the right juxtaposition of energy to that. And it's just interesting because, a lot of people know my fascination with Bruce Wayne, and some of our students just literally think I'm Batman, and they're
It's true.
They're terrified that I will, come down and just smash the not making sales or building products, right? And the neat thing about Batman is absolutely he's built this brand that like I've built my brand, where it's larger than life. Criminals fear him, and
Students fear.
there's just but he's also respected in the superhero community as one of the greatest strategists, intelligent people on earth, like the world's greatest detective. Like, there's a lot of respect for the skill set that he brings. But he's also seen as obtuse, as in that he doesn't have great social skills. He can be very mean. He can be very hard to get along with. He's not a team player. The same character also has the most famous sidekick in history, which is, Robin. And there are multiple iterations of Robin. And they're all learning under the tutelage of Bruce Wayne, who, as we know, has traveled the world and studied with the greatest masters and everything: escape artistry, magic, martial arts, detective work, chemistry, you name it. Now, after, learning all these things, not saying he's a master of any particular discipline, but assimilating all these skills, and with his own unique mission to not just fight crime, but, Batman's ultimate mission is to make sure that no kid feels the way that he did when his parents, were murdered in front of him, right? Like, it's really mission driven. Like, my mission here at iVenture is just, my whole life as a youth, I was told, no, you can't do this. You're not an engineer. You're not a business person. You're not rich enough. You can't start a company. You can't do this. And then I just did it. Now I can be in a place where I can help tell young people, no, like, I believe in you. It's going to be hard work. This is what we need to do to get it done. The tie-in with Robin is just so interesting because Batman sees kindred soul in Dick Grayson, the first Robin, whose parents owed some money to the mob, and they were trapeze artists, and their stage performance was sabotaged by the mob, and they fell to death in front of Dick, who was adopted by Bruce Wayne, and who eventually became a phenomenal Robin, who learned all these languages and fighting arts and detective work from his teacher. And eventually they have a falling out, where he reaches this point where he's becoming his own man, and Bruce Wayne's whole visage and portrayal is so menacing, and his whole outfit just screams pain and fear and rage. Whereas if you look at Robin, his uniform is, green and red and tights, and he's just cracking jokes and he's beating up people. It's very different, right? So they have a split when Robin grows up, and he eventually takes on his own moniker, which is Nightwing, and which is influenced by in many ways the antithesis of Batman, Superman. Superman essentially names him Nightwing and becomes his own man, goes into his own city, and becomes a hero. And my point with this is, Batman has built a very significant brand. But Dick Grayson, who believes in the same mission as Batman, but chooses a different path where he has, more stable love interests, lots of friends, a happier outlook in life, not isolated. I think he surpasses his mentor in his leadership abilities to the point where he actually leads the Justice League. That's something that Batman really doesn't do in the comics. So it's really fascinating just to see our dynamic. I'm not saying that's exactly what it's like, but it's just there are really neat outcomes that happen in leadership when you hire people that are, this is an obvious thing, but we often see it not happening when you hire people that are better than you in a lot of things. So again, thank you, Mayank, for being here and supporting all the work that we do.
It's so interesting. I know you told the night thing to me a couple of times. Feels like you're trying to tell me something.
You're not Robin. You're the Joker. You're the source of all my agony.
That's why we work so well together.
That's true. And just another quick tangent here, not that it really relates, but recent modern writers in comic books have discussed the nature of the Joker-Batman relationship because it's been going on for eons, from the very beginning, right? And, the Batman is dressed like a devil, but is really angelic in his nature. And the clown is actually the devious one. And there's so many juxtapositions. They're essentially the perfect yin and yang, locked in eternal battle. But modern writers have really focused on the fact that the Joker is actually, not romantically, but is actually in love with Batman. He can't exist without Batman. His whole purpose is to be locked in this eternal struggle with Batman. So I just want to throw that out there because, you talked a lot about love, and it's really interesting. Even at the ultimate villain-hero kind of combat, that's actually what unites them in a weird way,
It is so the yin and yang kind of thing. I've told Manu this a few times, but just the difference that we have in the way that we approach lives. I'm so happy to be here just because the groundedness that Manu brings is something that I need to become an even better version of myself, right? It's okay, I have this lovely kind of more airy perspective on life that is very grounded in other ways. When I think about it, but then having that direct control over your life kind of outlook, I'm wow, I need that to be better at what I want to accomplish in the world. So it's kind of locked in this cycle, or maybe we will be over the coming years just locked as in, wow, I just keep getting better at what I'm doing, and Manu finds new perspectives that makes him better at what he wants to accomplish in his life. I wonder how that turns out, either in the benefit of all or the demise.
Yeah, and also the ability to really dive into what we're good at and what we perceive ourselves as good at. So now I can really just dive into just more serious work, more strategic work. Mayank can be, the shoulder that people need when they're going through difficult times. So it's nice. We can dive into deeper things and not try to be everything everywhere all at once.
That's such a good movie. Such a good movie.
Speaking of movies, we talked about a couple of things that kind of influenced you. Are there any other things that really influenced you, to come to this point where all your thoughts?
To come to this specific point in what do you mean?
So, you mentioned Alan Watts. We talked about something in the book called The Egg. Are there any other things that influence your thinking?
I think
books, movies, podcasts, thinkers.
There's a really, really interesting, this is just, it comes to my mind. It's not a formative thing or anything. There's a book called A Visit from the Goon Squad. And if I remember correctly, each chapter is a different character that is a small character in the previous story. For example, if chapter 1 is about this record executive just doing whatever, and one of the side characters is just the driver, you know, or the side character is a person who sees something else go down. The next chapter is focused on that person. It keeps going on and on. If I remember correctly, that's the way that the story is, or the entire book is outlined. And just kind of realizing that people live very, very, very deep lives, and we only see a small fragment of it, right? Like that person who cut you off, like, yeah, maybe they're a bad person, or maybe they're just like bad at driving, or maybe they're in a rush to get somewhere, right? Like the person that you see at the grocery store, like you're thinking like, oh my God, how are they buying like 12 bags of chips and like 10 gallons of soda, whatever? And it's like, yeah, maybe they're throwing a party, or maybe they're depressed. You don't know. But the fact that you put all of these labels on what other people are doing does nothing other than clutter your own life and make you judgmental to a point where it doesn't really help you live a happier life, right? Like I see Manu as like, oh my God, he runs iVenture. He's so authoritarian. Like he's so stoic. Like he probably doesn't care about his students. He probably just cares about the program. Like, yeah, I could think that. Somebody on the outside might think that. They might think of him as a mythical figure who has everything figured out. But like now that I know Manu the way that I know him, it's kind of like, yeah, there are different facets to him. His life goes far deeper than any other student might see. And it's like, yeah, these labels like don't really help anyone. It just helps you think you're figuring out the world. Like this is a good person, that's a bad person, this is a lost person, that person has everything figured out. It's like you're just trying to stabilize yourself within this world. But it's also kind of like, yeah, those labels can be kind of unnecessary almost every single time that you try to use them. And to go back to like what, like any media that makes me think this way, Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of my favorite shows of all time. I'm just kind of gaining wisdom from your past lives, learning from your friends at the current time, realizing that you will also turn into someone in the future who will have an impact on the world in similar ways. Just kind of truly, truly understanding your context in the world, I think is invaluable in terms of like, if you want to live a happy life, like understand how you exist. Don't be so self-centered that it's all about me. Understand like the world that you exist within and the role that you play in that world. Maybe you don't play a role. Maybe you're just out here vibing. Maybe your role is just to have a good time in life, have a couple of good friends, have a good friend group, you know, party on the weekends, have dinner parties. Like you don't need to do something big with your life. Just like figure out what you want to do. Like maybe you're not meant to build $100 million company. I'm probably not going to be a billionaire. It's like, okay, cool. That's not my path. If you want to be happy, figure out your path. And again, going off on a tangent, but going back to your question about media, Sense8, the number 8, is probably one of the greatest shows of our generation. It's on Netflix. It's made by the Wachowski sisters. Initially, they were the Wachowski brothers who made things like The Matrix, things like Cloud Atlas. They made this show called Sense8, got canceled early, but it was about these 8 different people all over the world who in their adult lives become psychically connected. There's a businesswoman in Korea, a scientist in India, a cop in Chicago, a gay actor in Mexico, a widow in London / the Netherlands, a bus driver in somewhere in Nairobi, I think, and a trans woman in San Francisco. And in the middle of their lives, they have this like quote unquote birth where they all become psychically connected. They can see what the other person sees, feel, touch, hear. They can like control the other person's body as the show goes on and like kind of use their skills for whatever situations. And it's like, okay, imagine empathy at a point where you can literally live the life that somebody else lives. What does that world look like? What does love mean when you are literally another person? And of course, there's a ton of action involved, like people die, people get shot at. It's action, it's drama, it's empathy, it's pride, like the LGBTQ kind of pride. Oh, there was also a gangster in Germany. So it's very interesting, like, oh, a dude that's lived this gang kind of life where he kills and shoots people, who's also like a grand larceny kind of thief. Then there's also a cop in Chicago, but then there's also a scientist in India. Like, what is this connection like, right? This businesswoman in Korea and this truck driver or this bus driver in Nairobi, how are they connecting with each other on a personal level? Two worlds completely different and yet coming together. I think just labeling people distances us, if anything. We think it helps us categorize and find our place. I think it's far more isolating to live that kind of way.
Yeah, no, interesting. I think classification is a useful tool, but to your point, that whole concept, I think it's an internet word, Sonder, realization that in every individual, there's just a whole universe of thoughts and history and perspectives. It's almost overwhelming. It's at points, humans really need classification, but the points that you're making also show the drawbacks of that. Any parting messages to the world or to me? I quit.
So a resignation letter out of my pocket. Like, I've been waiting to give this to you. Manu, this is your resignation letter to the university.
You're taking over, huh?
This is my show now.
Okay.
I'm running the Justice League.
Please.
I
Take
think
this cup from me.
I think as for parting words, I think a lot of it's just about like, where's your happiness? Your happiness is not in judging yourself. It's not in judging other people. It's like everybody talks about finding your path, and it's like, stop retrofitting yourselves into other people's lives. It's like Manu shared this incredible story about Robin, Joker, Nightwing. It's like, yeah, I could retrofit myself into that role and try to live out that life, but like, is that me? If I wanted to become an incredible tennis player, it's like, okay, I could train 8 hours a day, but is that me? I want to be a more grounded person, but it's like, if I told myself that, hey, I want to be like Manu, like, that's not me. I want to be more grounded. I don't want to be like Manu. It's like, just pick and choose things that you want, and like, don't put yourself into any specific lane. Like, you have your whole life to figure out what you want. Like, people have midlife crises. Like, they don't know what they want. It's like, you might not either, and that's okay. Stop trying to think that you need to have it all figured out. Like, whatever age you are, you might be 19, you might be 25, you might be 30, you might be 40. It's like, yeah, you're figuring it out. Pick whatever time frame you want and tell me that your life sucks or that it's amazing. Just realize that you're just on a path. You're figuring it out. You're doing well sometimes, you're not doing well at other times. And just stop extrapolating the current moment that this will be like this forever. Like, oh, you're heartbroken? Oh my God, life is going to suck forever. Oh my goodness, this girl said that she liked me. It's going to last forever. Like, stop focusing on like, this is how the world will be forever. Just like, appreciate this moment and do what you can in this moment. And then like, whatever happens, like, it happens. The universe has your back.
Wonderful.
I quit.